As we round out the Golden Age, there are a number of writers we could talk about who bucked its ideals. But there's one name we must talk about: Alfred Bester. He is the grandfather of cyberpunk and the man who gave us Solomon Grundy. But perhaps most importantly, he's the man who taught generations to come that science fiction could have a reverent irreverence to it and still survive. Bester's beginnings are perhaps the least unusual of any of our Golden Age authors. He grew up, went to college, worked in PR, then tried his hand at writing sci-fi. But there's one interesting stop along the way: the University of Pennsylvania's Philomathian Society. The Philomathian Society was an academic society filled with lively discussion and literary debate. But perhaps most interesting is its motto. Not for the slightly jarring fact that it's in Latin while the word Philomathian is very Greek, but because of what it says. The motto is from Virgil, Sic itur ad astra, and it can be translated a few ways, such as, "So we go to the stars," "Such is the way to the stars," or somewhat more loosely, "The stars, my destination," a phrase which will come up again before we're done. Bester's entry into sci-fi, though, comes in the form of a contest. He submitted a sci-fi story to Thrilling Wonder Stories, and promptly got rejected. But the editors liked him, so they helped him clean up the piece, and when their magazine held an amateur writers competition, they urged him to submit it. He won, and it was off to the races. But is that whole amateur sci-fi competition thing pulling at your brain and sounding vaguely familiar? Well, that's because it was the exact same competition that Heinlein decided not to enter because the top prize was less than what Campbell's Astounding Stories was paying for regular stories that made the cut. I wonder what would have happened if they'd both ended up submitting their stories. Oh, alternate timeline questions. I digress. With his win, Bester started turning out stories. He graduated up the ranks and started publishing in Astounding himself. Then, in 1942, two of the editors he'd worked with on the science fiction beat moved to an up-and-coming comics company called Detective Comics. They urged Bester to come write for them, and so he took his talents to the comic world. He worked on Superman and Green Lantern, giving us characters like Vandal Savage and Solomon Grundy, and in doing so, helped cement the link between comics and sci-fi. He worked there for 4 years until his wife Raleigh pointed him towards the growing power of radio. A well-established radio actress herself, and the first voice of Lois Lane on The Adventures of Superman, she saw the increasing desire for genre fiction in the medium. And when a writing spot opened up on one of the detective shows she was familiar with, she urged Alfred to apply. He did, and he got it. Eventually, he would write for things like The Shadow and Charlie Chan. But by 1950, the science fiction bug had him again, and he returned to writing sci-fi short stories. Unfortunately, he was met with disappointment, not because his stories were rejected, but because Campbell had embraced L. Ron Hubbard and was promoting pseudoscience. So Bester decided his work with Astounding was done. And it's here his greatest work begins. He starts penning novels, the first of which was called The Demolished Man. It's a reverse mystery. In a world where telepathy is common, no murder has been committed for 70 years. With thoughts read, crimes are stopped before they are committed. But one rich and powerful man wants to commit a murder. The only question is, how can he do it? The book won the very first Hugo Award for Best Novel and established the critical slot of writing that Bester would be known for. He created characters of great power, functioning at the highest levels of society, but who, on some level, felt maligned by society, felt slighted or wronged. This made them outsiders with the perfect window in. They could see all of the corruption and decadence that the upper echelons of society contained as they themselves walked through it. But to me, this outsider-looking-in view is perhaps best exemplified in his next sci-fi novel, The Stars, My Destination. A man is stranded on a ship far, far out in space. Everyone else on the crew is dead. Each day, he just survives, scrounging for food and water in one of the last safe spaces on the wrecked ship. Then finally, after so much waiting, another vessel passes by. He sends them an SOS, but they simply leave him to die. something in him snaps. Where he was willing to simply accept life before, now he seizes it with a frenzy, and he teleports across space. Now, the ability to teleport isn't uncommon in this society, but the magnitude of his jump is unheard of. This power, though, is just the start of him developing into a new man, the man he needs to become. In a Count of Monte Cristo-esque transformation, he learns the skills he requires to infiltrate the highest tiers of society in order to find out who it was that left him to die, and then to exact his revenge. This story influenced William Gibson, Michael Moorcock, Samuel R. Delany, Joe Haldeman, Robert Silverberg, and even Stephen King, probably because it showed an alternative to the Golden Age writing of the time. It's gritty, it deals with the human psyche, and it's unafraid to confront the idea that the growing wealth of society might actually strip away some of its humanity. And it does it all with an irreverence that gets us away from the serious men doing serious things stereotype of the Golden Age. And as such, it's a precursor of what's to come. But before we can talk about all of the things that it's a precursor to, we must first talk about the great masters Tolkien and Herbert, the two people who have had more influence on genre fiction than perhaps any others. Now, we're going to take a season break, but join us again in a few months when we dive into Lord of the Rings and Dune. This is going to be amazing. I'm freaking out a little bit. And it begs the question, I wonder what spice you'd put on second breakfast. We'll see you then.